Cairo, Seattle.
It's time to get schooled with the professor, John Clayton.
Welcome to Schooled with the Professor, and a topic I think is great because I know sometimes Danny O'Neill goes crazy when he sees Pro Football Focus and he sees ratings of players, and he'll get into Twitter wars with Sam Monson from Pro Football Focus. But it's a fascinating subject, and it's a great tool because analytics is a part of the game. Maybe it's not working for the Cleveland Browns, but it's something that every team uses because what you have to do is do evaluations. And one thing that's great is that you have a system and a site like Pro Football Focus that goes ahead and evaluates every player, evaluates every play, and I know that my buddy Doug Farrar does it for Bleacher Report. They evaluate every player, and so these are things that are valuable in a lot of ways to fans because you want perspective because if you're a fan, naturally you're going to be a little bit biased towards your team. You're going to be a little bit biased if you're a fantasy follower for the players that you have on your team. But also what you want is independent ideas, and it gives you an idea. It's like, oh, I didn't think this guy was that good, or I didn't know this guy was playing that poorly. Pro Football Focus and so many other sites that are evolving are there for you that you can get into it. And in Pro Football Focus's case, is a very reasonable price to get in. And so I bring this all up because that's the topic of the day. Analyzing teams, analyzing data, analyzing players. And I know that, having been in the fortune of covering the NFL since the 70s, I sure wish the things that are available now were available then, but I'm thankful that they're available now because what you can start to do is, start to look. And I know when, like, for example, a Seahawk fan is going to get very irritated when a Pro Football Focus is going to come out and, rip the offensive line and talk about how bad it is, but understand that in the case of Pro Football Focus, they have like 35 people that are kind of working together, evaluating each play, each position, each identity of the player and all that. And so, for example, they have confirmed and affirmed the great success of Justin Britt as now, one of the emerging good centers in the league. And so they acknowledge that. And they point to the problems at the tackle position. They try to identify, if there's improvements, and they try to track this every week, every game. And they're getting so fast at doing it, they can actually post the information as soon as the game's over, which I find to be remarkable. It used to be such that I still remember like 7-8 years ago, I was always trying the best I could, on one team to track the number of plays. Well, they have that all totaled up as the game is going on. And so all these things for information, and again, maybe that's because I'm a football geek trying to study this stuff, I just find so valuable. Now, again, you don't have to agree with the individual ratings. And again, these are the opinions. And, if you go to different services and even different teams, they're going to have different opinions. But you now have, ability to pick up this type of sourcing to be able to start, having fun with it. And again, if you're a fantasy player, there's a great value in that because there's different ways that all these sites have, particularly Pro Football Focus, in being able to take the players that you have, put the grades in, put the ratings in, and then be able to see where those players are going to rank. So it's just a great thing that's going to be there. But I think it also speaks to the evolving technology in the National Football League. Teams are doing this, and fans are doing this, and of course these companies are doing this. And so to bring this all to your attention, that's why we made it a topic for tonight and today, because I just think it's fascinating, where this is all going. I know, for example, one of the things that's coming out in the National Football League for evaluation, and is really going to help identify things on the offensive line, is putting the chips that will be studying how fast players are moving and where players are moving in offensive lines. And those chips will then, give data as far as how fast they're moving, what they're able to do, how it's kind of meshing together. And by the end of this year, once some of that information starts, filtering out, it's going to improve even more of the evaluation process of units on the field and teams and all those different things. And, there's value to those chips. Like, I'll give you an example in an NBA one, because they were doing these type of metrics a few years ago. Robert Garnett, the big older center with it was Boston Celtics, they were looking at the games, and they would realize, boy, after about 6-7 minutes, he seems to really be slowing down. what seems to be going on. And so they actually put some chips in some things, and they followed him, and they realized his speed would go down after 7 minutes. So what did they do? They twisted things around, and they would purposely rest him after 7 minutes. And out of that, he would come back and be fresher. And so what happens is his numbers started to get better in a couple years because now they find better ways of using him. And for older players, I think in the National Football League, they can use those type of chips and that to make those studies and see, okay, if we give this guy a little bit of rest, because you can see that if you're out there for 60, 65 plays, that's a lot, and you do wear down, and there's going to be an increase of no huddle type of offenses. And so these give the teams the ability to evaluate, okay, who's slowing down, how many plays can a guy go without that, and help in the substitution package, and also bring fresher players out there that can make some plays. So these are the things that are going on technologically that, one, get better performance out of players and better performances out of teams, and two, some of this stuff becomes available to the fans so they can look on and kind of get into the heads of the people that are making these decisions, and you can see what you can have, and you can have your opinion. You get such an informed opinion when you have all this type of information. Well, coming up next, we're going to go to talk to Jeff Dooley from Pro Football Focus to give you an idea what goes into these evaluations, how do they come up with them, what do they mean. Jeff Dooley coming up next. Joining us right now is Jeff Dooley from Pro Football Focus. And the big thing to try to study, because that's what I've been amazed with, and I'm very impressed with Pro Football Focus, because what it does, it allows fans to be able to, get ratings of players. It also, behind the scenes, you're working with teams too, but kind of go through a little bit of the history that of how Pro Football Focus started and what the intention is and where it is now.
Sure, yeah. It was started over in the UK by Neil Hornsby, our founder and our president of football operations. And it really, just sort of came about. The basic idea was, he was sort of underwhelmed by the amount of information that was available to him as a football fan. So he really started it as a hobby. And sort of, I'd say the central core of the company then, and it still is now, is the grading system, which is based on, grading every player on every snap of every game in the NFL. That's since expanded to college at the FBS level, so any game, including an FBS opponent. So we have that now, which is also really valuable, not just evaluating college football, but evaluating prospects for the draft. But really, that's sort of the core of it. And sort of in the last couple of years, we've had some changes with Chris Collinsworth bought the company a couple years ago, and sort of with the aim of looking towards delivering this information to fans as best possible, because as you mentioned, there's, previously and to this day, a lot of relationships with teams providing them with data and analysis. But really the idea is wanting to make fans smarter, and whether it's making fantasy football decisions or, making a friendly wager on a game, or just sort of wanting to win the argument. That's the idea behind it all. And so the grades are sort of the central part of that.
And of course, that's the thing that I think is so fascinating, because again, these things weren't available, say, 20 years ago, and now you can, get ideas of where players rate, where positions rate, where teams rate. First off, how many employees are sitting there looking at games and making judgments, and what do they do physically? Do they punch things into a computer? How's that process work with the number of people and the process?
Sure. Yeah. So I want to say there's roughly 35 full-time analysts, and that's the title given to the guys for actually doing the analysis of the games. There's sort of two critical processes. One is recording player participation. So it's literally on every play marking down where each guy is lined up, who's on the field, and then the second component of that is the actual grading of the player. So how they performed on each play. And so that's a matter of sitting down and watching the game unfold, and recording, okay, if a quarterback makes an excellent throw, 30 yards downfield, tight window throw, and then the receiver drops it, the quarterback gets a positive grade for that play, because he did his job, whereas the receiver gets a negative play. So that's one where it's 0 yards in the stat sheet in the box score. But the quarterback performed well. And so that's sort of at the core of it is trying to just evaluate that individual performance on every single play, and then translating that into a game grade and then also the season grade.
I know one of the things that's been kind of evolving and it's even more pronounced this year is the fact that, I mean, you're posting game grades right at the end of games. I mean, because you would have to think you're trying to study where 22 players, or at least maybe 11 on one side, are on each play. I mean, and you would think it'd be a little bit of a drag time, with slowing down tape and slowing down things of that nature. Yet, how is it done that at the end of a game you can almost post the grades?
Yeah, and that sort of gets to your question about the number of people involved. And so the processes are split up so that one person is just recording where everyone is. Another person is doing the actual grading of the offensive players. Then there's two more people looking at it on the defensive side. So they're able to sort of, by segmenting the responsibilities there, that's how we're able to do it in close to real time. Sort of, as the grading is going, it depends on sort of how long the drives go. Sometimes we do catch up, sort of in real time. And then certainly by like halftime of games, we usually have halftime grades. And then usually, typically for like the primetime games, we've been sometimes within 15 minutes of the game being completed, the first run of the grades are done. And then there is a review process that we go through, on our end. So then all of the grades get reviewed by one of our senior analysts, and we also have a relationship with a company called the Pro Coach Network, which is a group of former NFL coaches, and they review the grades for a final review. And so sometimes we do have post-game adjustments off of the grades just to make sure everything's solid. But yeah, the live, the real-time process is new this year, and it's allowing us to deliver grades to fans basically right after the games are done.
Yeah, and then the great part is, I mean, if you're a fan and you can kind of pick up, what you find out about your team, what the weaknesses of your team are. And again, these are opinions, and so some may agree, some may not. But the fact that you have so many eyes looking at it, it just becomes an intriguing thing and a great asset. I would have to think, if you are a fan, just trying to get an idea, it's like, okay, is what you're seeing jiving with what other people are seeing?
I think so. And, I know certainly in my case, where it's opened my eyes is the positions that you can't track so easily with statistics. So it's valuable at every position, quarterbacks, receivers, running backs, all that. But being able to see the grades for offensive linemen, for pass rushers, not just looking at a sack total, but being able to see, okay, how well does Von Miller play against the run? How well does he grade as a pass rusher? And then certainly like the offensive line. I think that's been sort of my biggest awakening is sort of by being immersed in this data. And then fans certainly have the access to it through the player grades and through the content we run on profootballfocus.com. But I really do think that's where it, to me, to be able to see, okay, this is how well the offensive line is playing, not just yards per carry and sacks given up. I think there was sort of a much more limited amount of information previously. And so I think it's changing the way you can look at the game.
And of course, that's the one thing that I think is so difficult, I would imagine, because, I mean, number one, particularly with all the zone blocking teams, trying to identify, okay, who's supposed to be doing what? Because, I mean, you're not into the heads of the players knowing what the assignments are. I mean, certainly you can see, if you run well to the right side and the right tackle's blocking, you can get a good or negative grade on that guy. But how do you try to incorporate the zone blocking teams and the assignments on missed blocks for sacks, missed blocks on runs?
Yeah, so a big part of the training process is to make sure that the grading has a consistency level, so that each one analyst versus another analyst, that those grades are going to be translated the same way. We have a former college assistant coach, Taylor Wright, who's our run game coordinator, and so a lot of the work in the off season that goes into that is he's working with our analysts to sort of to coach them up on what to look for in the different blocking schemes, and then zone blocking in particular. So that's sort of something that gets factored into the entire process, so that we are evaluating correctly based off of the particular play.
I know one thing that's coming around the corner because I think the NFL's trying to incorporate it this year is particularly with the offensive linemen. I think they're doing some speed studies showing where the guys are, and I know that's going to start to become available for a lot of people within the next year. What are some of the technical things coming ahead that's going to aid, particularly in judging offensive linemen what they're doing?
That's a good question, John. I know with the NFL sort of recording the NGS data, sort of the chips in the shoulder pad. So even I know, I've seen it a bunch of times when they'll be tracking on the field how many yards a guy ran on a particular play or what their speed was running downfield, whether it's open field run or something like that. And so whether that will, to what degree those things are going to come into play for offensive linemen, I think that's a really good question. But I think to me, what's been sort of eye opening is just being able to record the performance in the two facets of the game, in run blocking and pass blocking. What that means for offensive linemen and their productivity.
Is there going to be some time, because I would imagine the technology is changing so fast that because I know there's some technology available, I don't know how valid it is, where you can take one play, put it into some kind of a computer program, and then get some evaluations of that. I mean, how will that technology evolve, or will it not evolve?
No, I could certainly see it evolving, and you could sort of, I certainly haven't had any access to anything like it. But the idea, if can you truly track players using, the chip information? Can you just like plug that information into a computer, and then you're able to just sort of see a visual representation of the play just based off of that? That's certainly where my mind goes. So I think it really is going to continue to evolve in ways like that, and probably ways we're not even thinking about right now.
I know this may be a little bit inside, but I know the one thing that does come out, because I see it in some of the evaluations, is that particularly on some defensive players that play in the nickel, it seems that their value is enhanced with what they do against the pass. Because, I mean, I know it just, how bad I study salaries and stuff like that. Nickel defense is going to be on the field 2/3 of the time. And, a defensive tackle who's like, let's say, in a 4-3 rush, and a 4-2, who can rush the passer, like a couple years ago, Clinton McDonald and others, they tend to get a little bit of a higher grade. Is that because, one, they're on the field a little bit more, or their value in trying to stop things on the pass?
Yeah, I definitely think, to your point, it's such a passing league. We're talking about 2/3 of the plays. A lot of teams are lining up with 3 wide receivers the majority of the time. I think there's a couple interesting things there. One is, we have a couple of our analysts have actually advocated for like breaking out slot receiver and slot corner as their own individual positions, that there is sort of unique value there. I think, slot receivers are among the most undervalued players in the NFL right now. And then when you talk about, let's take a guy like Frank Clark of the Seahawks. He was drafted as a defensive end, and in base downs, that's where he's going to line up. But his ability to kick inside and be effective as an interior pass rusher just enhances his value all the more, because then, when Michael Bennett gets back from injury, you've got him, you've got Averill, you've got Frank Clark rushing from the inside. It just makes that pass rush that much more formidable. So any sort of, I think, versatility in that respect certainly enhances players' value.
And by the way, I point this out for anybody who doesn't subscribe to Pro Football Focus. One of the things that's in there, and if you follow the game closely, is that they'll break down rosters both in base defense and also in nickel defense, and then also put in there, who is on the passing, when they go into a passing mode and a regular mode. And I think, if you're going to be a student of the game, you kind of have to break down where these teams are, and I think fans like that.
I do too, and you think about I think about a guy like Joey Bosa, who went 3rd to the Chargers this year, and nobody was really mock drafting him to go 3rd to the Chargers because the Chargers are a 3-4 base defense, and Bosa just really projected as a traditional 4-3 defensive end. But when you if you focus in on it that way, you forget 2/3 of the time San Diego is going to be in a nickel package, most likely, sort of obvious passing situation matching up against a 3 wide receiver set. And so Joey Bosa is going to be playing with his hand in the dirt as as a defensive end in a 4-person line. And so when you look at it that way, it's like of course he becomes a really logical fit, and he's just been having an outstanding rookie season so far after that contract holdout. And he was a guy who, at the college level for the past 2 seasons, was at the very top of our grade. So I think I do think sort of that's another thing that's been eye-opening for me.
Okay, now, of course, let's get into specifics here, too. I know fans in Seattle look at the Seahawks offensive line and know there has been some issues. Pro Football Focus has been pretty consistent in pulling down the value of that line, although in the last couple of weeks, it's risen from number 32 to 29, not because of maybe some progress noted, some progress to one degree in the center, but Justin Britt. But Pro Football Focus doesn't give good ratings right now to the Seahawks offensive line.
No, I mean it's been a problem area for a while. To your point, entering the Patriots game, they were 32nd in pass blocking and 32nd in run blocking. And you look at sort of across the league there. It's hard to find any contending team with a weakness at any position to quite that degree. And if anything, I just think it definitely points to Russell Wilson's value. If you didn't have a quarterback back there with his elusiveness, his ability to thrive against pressure, he's at the top of our. We break down performance like for QBs, clean pocket versus under pressure. He's number 1 in terms of passer rating when under pressure this season, which is a good thing because he's under pressure a lot. So I think you just look at the way they've certainly invested a lot of money in the defense, and with good reason, because there's such good players on that side of the ball. They want to lock up Richard Sherman among them. And I think, just the value of Russell Wilson being able to succeed, even though the offensive line's been struggling.
So now what, aside from Russell Wilson, puts this team as a 6-2-1 team that does have, I guess, a pretty good chance to go to the Super Bowl?
Yeah, I mean, certainly on defense, they're so good up front, so good against the run. And also, I think Jimmy Graham's, reemergence has been big. He entered last week as the number 3 tight end in our grades. And also, I think, Doug Baldwin, I don't know if you call him underrated, John, but I don't know if people truly appreciate his value. He gets it done in the slot. But he's just been such a consistent performer. He's number 4 in our wide receiver grades, behind some sort of, elite measurable guys like Julio Jones and A.J. Green and Mike Evans, and then Doug Baldwin's right there. So I think he's sort of an underrated piece of the puzzle.
And, of course, I mean, for those fans who might be upset about the offensive line grading, they have to also look at some of the grading of the players. Like, for example, I think Pro Football Focus was the first to really put Michael Bennett among the best defensive players in football, not just defensive linemen, among the best defensive players in football, and picking up on some of the other guys on defense.
No, absolutely. And Cliff Averill has been unbelievable this year in terms of his ability to generate pressure. And not that he hasn't been in previous seasons, but he was right up there again. Entering this last week, he was 4th in the entire NFL in generating pressure, and that's across positions. So the guys on that list are Von Miller and Aaron Donald. So he's right up among the NFL's elite just in his ability to generate pressure. And when I reference that stat, we look at total pressure, so that includes sacks, it includes hits, and it includes hurries. So anytime you're disrupting a quarterback's drop back, that's something we keep track of, and he's certainly right up there. So I think as you're looking at the NFC right now, you got to put them right near the top. Obviously, Dallas has been playing great. I think their big weakness is the pass rush. I don't know if that's going to come back to bite them at all. I was interested to see them against the Steelers, against an elite quarterback who can sort of pick apart a defense that doesn't have an elite pass rush. But yeah, I think you got to put Seattle at the top or right aside at the top.
And then finally, how can a fan, and kind of give what packages are available if they want to try to get into Pro Football Focus?
Sure, and I think fantasy football players, if you're looking for advice, you can sign up for our Fantasy Gold subscription, which helps you with season-long advice, everything from content advice on who to pick up on the waiver wire, and going through all of that. We also, if you're a DFS player, there's a separate package for that. Again, there's content on the site that sort of advises you there. We also have an optimizer tool if you want to input multiple lineups, sort of leverage all of the PFF grades, data, all of that stuff. The stuff the teams use, you can use for your own fantasy team. But if you want to keep track of the grades and be able to see how your team stacks up, and also positional rankings, so see all the quarterbacks graded in the league, you can get our player grade subscription, which is available on the site as well. That's for $19.99. So those are sort of some of the resources available to fans.
Okay, and of course, the one final note here is that it's kind of ironic because, I work with Jeff at ESPN.com, and he follows me and Pat Kerwin on Sirius XM NFL Radio every Thursday. And so you're on at 4 o'clock West Coast time, where I'm on from 12 to 4 with Pat Kerwin. So I guess I'll be warming things up for you every Thursday.
The best warm-up act we could ever ask for, John. And I gotta say, when we were working together, John, it was sort of too brief. I was only your editor for a little while, but it was the type of thing where as soon as we had an idea, we kick it out to you. Hey, John, can we have the top free agents for next year? Thinking, okay, this will maybe sometime next week. Might take him 3 or 4 days to pull it together. 2 hours later, it'll show up in the inbox, and it's awesome reporting. And so you're truly one of the best in the business, and I miss working with you.
Okay, well, Jeff, it's great being with you, and we'll be talking soon.
Thanks so much, John.
Good news, everyone! It's time
to ask the professor.
That's because I'm not a penniless hippie.
Welcome back to Schooled with the Professor. Remember, each week you get a chance to ask me any question you have relating to the podcast. Just get on Twitter and use the hashtag ClaytonSchooled. This week I talked to Jeff Dooley of Pro Football Focus, and our question comes from David in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. David asks, how, if at all, the new analytics in football has affected the NFL draft and front offices across the league? That's a great question because, more and more teams are dabbling in this. And I'll give you an example. There was 2 young, and again, it's funny because, you're talking about 22, 23-year-old guys that are getting involved with these, but they're students. They've been studying, the metrics of sports and all these different things for some time. So Rick Spielman of the Minnesota Vikings, just brings 2 young guys in as consultants, and they have different metrics because what they'll do is that they'll look and see what a player looks like as far as every piece of tape, what they evaluate for his speed. So example was Stephon Diggs, a wide receiver that was taken, did not go in the first round. Didn't run a good 40 time. But what the metrics showed is that he is able to be faster than his apparent speed. In other words, there's one speed when you run a 40-yard dash, but basically you run a 40-yard dash in Indianapolis and you never really run one again. How fast you are as a player if you're faster, because now you're wearing a helmet, you're wearing a different type of protective gear and all that. You got all this extra weight on you, but they looked at it and they said, boy, look at Stephon Diggs and how he seems to be so much faster than what he looks on tape, and that's exactly what they found. And so they used those metrics and came out with Diggs, who's been an absolute superstar. He did well in the first year, but if you look back in the last couple of weeks, he's had 13 catches in each of the last 2 games. He has been an absolute monster. And so what this does, particularly from the draft standpoint, it could take guys that may be considered low draft choices, and if they use it right, higher draft choices, or it would be able to take the guys like Doug Baldwin, for example, see what he's able to do and say, wait a second, this guy's not an undrafted guy. He's got these type of things. And so it's first the visual things that you're able to see, and then the analytical things. And so with now so many different sites trying to go ahead and do this, one, as a fan, you can kind of keep up on this. For example, Pro Football Focus is already evaluating the top 32, and then you have different sites like CBS Drafts and all that they do a great job of evaluating. But yeah, no, what it does, it gets more information that teams study and also more information that fans study that you can keep up on it. Already, you can go on different sites and you can look and see the valuations of quarterbacks are going down, and it's going to be cited for either accuracy readings or different things that they see as far as the footwork, slow delivery, all those different things that teams evaluate. But what the metrics do as far as the analytics, it just gives more more things to evaluate, and it's going to continue to get better and better and better, because now they're going to have the science of putting chips in shoulder pads to be able to judge different speeds of things that are going, and different type of things. They can actually, they'll have evaluations. Of course, and any analytics person will tell you they break down size, they break down speed, they break down hand size. I mean, you, for example, you don't want a offensive lineman pretty much who doesn't have a 30 plus reach, because all of a sudden he's going to have a difficult time trying to get his arms into a defender and try to block him. And so there's different things like that. I mean, for example, you don't necessarily want too many offensive linemen that are shorter than 6'3". So they'll have all those metrics, and they continue to evolve, because what they'll do is that they'll take the analytics of what has happened and then make adjustments, in the sense that you can start to say, okay, well, this failed because of this, and you can look at the size, dimensions, and numbers and things, and the numbers keep growing and growing. So it's a big aid to front offices in the draft, and it's going to continue. Now, again, we don't know if it's necessarily going to work for the Cleveland Browns, but we can definitely tell you it works for different teams, and we can say that it's a big thing that's getting, baseball has it, basketball has it, football has it, and it's going to continue to grow. And it does make the chance, David, that you can see that this is going to be a big thing for the future. May not make you perfect, because again, these are human making judgments, but it gives you more information to make better judgments. That's it for this week's edition of Schooled. You can follow me on Twitter at ClaytonESPN and send me your NFL questions with hashtag ClaytonSchooled for a chance to get your questions on the podcast. Thanks for listening. Class dismissed.